Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Kenya's free visa entry policy. Our webinar is titled Open Borders, Open Opportunities, Implications of Kenya's visa-free policy. So what we shall be doing today is that we are exploring the complexities and implications of this policy. And to do so, we shall be guided by insights from our panelists. Before we start, I would kindly let you know that the Chatham rules do not apply to this event. And as such, you may be quoted without your express permission. And second, microphones on mute and cameras turned off throughout the event. Thank you. So colleagues, since the adoption of the free movement of protocol in 2018, which was also adopted at the same time with the AFCFTA, the protocol on trade, research has shown that there is a persistent, including our own research here at the ISS, persistent apathy among African countries towards adopting the Continental Free Movement Protocol. But also it's in the same breath, it is very fascinating to observe that 5 years or since then, there has been a significant rise in the number and intensity of bilateral visa agreements, with this trend peaking in 2023. So if we look at the Visa Openness Report in 2023, the Africa Visa Openness Report of 2023, it shows at least 54 African countries. Out of the 54, 48 allow citizens of at least one other country visa-free entry. And the remaining 6, of the 6 that do not offer this, 4 provide visas on arrival to all other African countries and rank in the top 20. When it comes to visa on arrival, at least 30 countries offer this to citizens of at least one other African country. When it comes to visa ahead of travel and e-visas, the research findings show that 30 countries still require that citizens from over half of other countries obtain a visa before travel. So these findings, these are at the country level, but there are also interesting insights at the regional level, where West Africa still dominates the top ranks with 7 of its countries in the top 10 countries and 8 in the top 20, including Benin and Gambia that have been in the discussions, which are among the 4 highest ranking countries on the continent as of 2023. Probably in 2024, this year, maybe the report will include Kenya. East Africa also matches West Africa in influence. It contributes 8 countries in the top 20, where Seychelles and Rwanda are among the 4 highest ranking countries. So Rwanda, as of last year, was the newcomer on the block. I think Kenya will be the next in this year. South Africa has maintained 3 countries in the top 20. This number was the same in 2022. And North Africa only has 1 country in the top 20. But unfortunately, Central Africa remains unrepresented. So why am I giving these facts? It shows how the bilateral agreements have been intensified in the last couple of years. So colleagues, this afternoon, in January 2024, Kenya introduced a visa-free entry policy, a move that is seen to underscore the country's commitment to African unity and cooperation. So, of course, this policy aligns with the African Union's objective of free movement across the continent. It does. And so, as such, it positions Kenya as a key player in regional integration efforts. But this hasn't come without hiccups and challenges. And so, it is against this backdrop that the Institute of Security Studies, for Security Studies, and in conjunction with the African Migration and Development Center, has organized this webinar so that we can have a discussion on this issue. So this afternoon, we aim to unpack the layers and examine the broader implications of Kenya's groundbreaking visa-free policy, which is set within what I want to call ambitious framework of achieving a borderless Africa. So this afternoon, I'm joined by an esteemed panel of experts who will help us unpack this timely topic. So, colleagues, our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Linda Adhiambo Oucho, who is an established migration expert and the executive director of the African Migration and Development Center, an independent research think tank based in Nairobi. And she, of course, she holds a PhD in ethnic relations from Warwick University. And she has significantly contributed to research in numerous sub-Saharan African countries. Linda, take it away.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this discussion. It has been a hot debate since it was announced last year. And I think it's something that we've been having conversations about in the past 5 years about what free movement looks like at a regional level, but also at a national level. Now, in my role as what I do, I at least have the opportunity to engage with policymakers at national and regional level. And this discussion of how we can actually achieve free movement has been top on the agenda. And I think we were excited last year when we were hearing Kenya was making that move towards that, because Rwanda and Seychelles, as you mentioned, are top on that list. However, when we did have the announcement on 12th December during Jamhuri Day celebrations, I think it came with an additional aspect that we didn't anticipate, which was the electronic travel authorization approach. Now, I came across that the first time when I went to Seychelles and I was undertaking some work, and the requirement to sort of identify why you're going to a country, how long you're going to stay for the short-term period was new to me. Although it was easy to sort of like go through it because it was electronic, I didn't have to go to a consulate to get that visa or that permit. So I found it easy to do that. But then I think the approach in Kenya led to a bit of confusion, because when people say visa free, the assumption is you can go to the country and at least meet the requirements, ensure that you meet the requirements and be allowed entry to the country. So when the ETA was introduced, it was as if there was a very limited sensitization of what this ETA is about and who it applies to. And at the moment, we have a situation where countries that were actually enjoying visa-free, like Malawi, that could actually come into the country without having to get a visa, have to now apply for the ETA. So this pre-assessment process is actually adding another layer of requirements for countries who were visa-free before to access the country that was easily accessible before. So I think there's this aspect where we're trying to understand, are we really visa-free? Is this a visa-free regime? I think in the sense it could be, because we're not putting a stamp on your passport to say you have a visa to enter Kenya. It's digitized. But then there's this added layer of requiring you to actually identify where you're staying, provide a return ticket, and at least sort of like be pre-assessed before you come into the country. So they're raising questions as to, is this visa free? And what does this mean for open borders, especially for countries where in East Africa, we're trying to achieve free movement in the East African community. So I think these debates are still ongoing. It's still a very big issue, and a lot of people are not aware of the ETA process. And I'm just talking personally about how some family members who are outside the country, they have foreign passports, they just assumed that the process was the same, and they were not aware that the system changed. So it's a question of how do you sensitize and engage the global population, including nationals, including travel agencies, to advise the travelers that before they apply for or get a ticket, have they gotten an ETA, or is that part of the service? So I feel like there's some gaps, there's some misunderstandings of what is happening in Kenya. It is visa-free, but then I think the concept of ETA is leading to confusion. And I think it was recently, if not February, but towards the end of last year, they had introduced in the Gazette visa requirements for long-term stays. So I think that also added another layer of confusion of, are we now going back to visas again? And for what purpose and what reason? So I think there's a lot going on at the moment. I feel like this will be a challenge for regional and continental integration, especially if we have already established relations with countries where we've allowed visa-free access to each country based on the visa agreements. And I fear that it could be a situation where countries will require Kenyans to go and get visas as well, or do an ETA process of the same, so that at least there's some balance. So it's almost like, are we going back to where we came from, where it was we need to apply for visas prior prior to departure. And our country is going to also adopt ETAs as a means to sort of like create an opportunity of free movement, but not necessarily, it's not necessarily free because you have to be pre-assessed before you enter the country. So I feel like there's this aspect we need to clarify what ETA is to all travelers, where they're coming from, especially in Africa, where we're talking about free movement, the free movement protocol. What does ETA mean for someone coming from Central Africa, someone from North Africa? And how does it mean what does it mean for free movement of persons and visa-free access to the country? That discussion needs to be held, and I think clarification needs to be made. Secondly, I think there's that aspect of at least looking at the bigger picture. Is this going to cause a hindrance for, trade and engagement? Because if you cannot access a country easily, then you'll be discouraged to actually go to that country and go to the next country that's actually easier to access. So I feel like there's so many discussions and debates that are being held, and I feel like there's a need to clarify several issues from different fronts, for students, for researchers, for traders, for business people, so that they understand what they're getting into and what visa-free movement looks like in Kenya. So maybe I'll stop there, and we'll probably have another discussion, and maybe questions from the audience will actually spark more debate on this issue. So over to you, Margaret.
Thank you so much for that brief comments, Linda. You raised very important issues around the misconceptions about free movement of persons in Africa generally. And in Kenya is a very good case because there is the assumption that when it's free, it's free. You wake up and you take your bags, off you go. But what you're telling us that there is little sensitization on what this exactly means. In fact, some people that they heard about the electronic authorization for the first time. I mean, you've never heard about even the Kenyans themselves, and so it's become a hurdle. It's like replacing one hurdle with another, and so this needs, like you advise, more conversations around that among different stakeholders to streamline the free movement, the free policy in Kenya. So thank you so much for those introductory remarks. I will then move on to our second speaker, who is Dr. Nancy Adosi. Dr. Nancy Adosi is a Togolese expert who has worked on my affairs in various parts and Africa. She currently serves as the Senior Program Officer of the Free Movement of Persons Protocol under the Humanitarian Division of the African Union, where she leads the development and the implementation of the African Union, the FPM work plan. What a better person to have on the panel today. So Dr. Nancy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me, and then I will transition right into my presentation, if I can. All right, so I'm just going to put it into presentation mode. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the implications of the current visa-free policy for an integrated Africa, because I think that's one of the most important things that the African Union is looking forward to, is ensuring that this visa-free policy is leading towards a more integrated Africa. So we're just going to go in a little bit into the background of the protocol itself, unpacking it, looking at some of the implementation roles and responsibilities under it, because I think it's really important to look at what the member states are responsible for, as well as the regional economic communities, looking at the implication of the policy itself on regional integration. And then I also wanted to, this is me just trying to look at what are the differences between an ETA and a visa, because I think that's one of the major areas where we have a little bit of confusion. So it's envisaged that African development and integration will not be achieved without breaking the barriers that impede the free movement of persons across the continent. This is where we get Aspiration 2 from Agenda 2063. And Aspiration 2 actually calls for an integrated continent politically united based on the ideas of Pan-Africanism and the vision for an African renaissance in Africa. So the visa-free policy that was recently introduced in December was received very well by the AU, because what it does is that it encourages other countries within the region and also other countries within Africa to move towards a more free movement policy as we're looking at some of these policies. So we see that, for example, we have Benin, you've mentioned, Margaret, you've mentioned Benin, you've mentioned Seychelles, the Gambia. These countries are actually moving towards more free movement, despite the low ratification that we have so far. We also have the Mekele Retreat, which further reaffirms its commitment to free movement of people and goods, which will grant access to all AU member state citizens. And then finally, we have some of the decisions during the assembly in Kigali, Rwanda, which launched the African passport and called upon the Commission to support member states to issue it. So all in all, the Kenya free visa policy is something that is pointing to the fact that we're moving towards a more generally free movement policy. So just breaking down what the protocol has, we have definitions, objectives, principles of the protocol, and of course, free movement of persons. I do want to focus here on the right of entry, because I think that's where we get the meat of this free movement policy that visa-free policy that Kenya has currently been working on. And that is where we look at the right of entry, meaning how people are coming into the country. So I'm going to skip at this and come back to it. So the visa-free policy announced by President Ruto in 2023 actually allows for EAC countries to travel to Kenya without an ETA. So I want to mention that as well. Without paying for an ETA. And this policy also allows for non-EAC countries to travel to Kenya and move freely for 90 days, which is actually part of the protocol itself. Together, these benefits ensure that more Africans can travel to and take advantage of the openness of Kenya. And it also encourages young Africans to consider Kenya as a country that is positively moving towards the second phase of the protocol, which includes right of residence. So as you saw that I've mentioned before, that we have right of entry as the first phase, and then the second phase that we have is going to be right of residence, which is the second phase. So when we're looking at this visa-free policy, it's actually encouraging a lot of Africans, especially within the EAC region, to consider Kenya as a country in which they can move freely, and also ultimately, if they decide to reside, think about residing in Kenya. The important thing here is that we need member states to be able to have policies that encourage movement. And I think that's really important. Although there are questions around whether or not an ETA is a visa or whether or not this is just another type of visa, I think one of the most important things we need to focus on is the fact that it is encouraging movement and is encouraging right of entry, right? So we're moving towards a positive trend. This policy also provides an opportunity, as I've mentioned, to move towards increasing the number of countries that it bilaterally allows to travel visa and ETA free. So for example, Ethiopia is one of the countries recently where they currently do not need an ETA. So I've actually taken a screenshot from the Kenyan ETA website, and it actually mentions who's exempt from the ETA. So we see here we have holders of valid Kenya passports or one-way emergency certificates, holders of Kenya permanent residence, valid work permits, holders of valid UN conventional travel documents, members of diplomatic missions, citizens of the East African partner states. And this is really important for us as the African Union to see that the citizens of East African partner states are not included within this, are exempted from the ETA for at least 6 months, which is amazing. It goes beyond even what the protocol calls for, which is 90 days. And then finally, all passengers in transit through Kenya arriving and leaving by the same aircraft. Finally, I do want to go into a little bit on the differences between ETAs and visas. So I am not a lawyer, so I would ask the lawyers in the room to correct me if I'm wrong, but I did do some research on what an ETA is and what a visa is. And before I even go into the differences, I want to point out from my experience, because I've also been able to witness some of the policies, migration policies in other regions of the world. When we're looking at particularly, I can use Canada, US, and Mexico as an example. US citizens need an ETA to be able to go to Canada, and they do have to pay for it. So it is something that we see happening in other regions. This is not uncommon. I want to make sure that we understand this is not an uncommon thing. But when we're looking at an ETA, there is a visa-free application underneath an ETA policy, right? So an ETA implies that you're coming from a country where you are being exempted from having a visa. A visa implies that you're applying for and being evaluated for a visa, right? An ETA is a pre-travel authorization, and a visa grants you permission as well. And then, of course, an ETA enables immigration officials to account for people for security reasons. I think this is one of the most important things that we need to talk about when we're thinking about free movement, is that a lot of immigration officials that we've talked to have mentioned, like, okay, how do I know who's coming into the country? How am I able to continue to do my job as a security official, as, you know, as that person who's a focal point for security of my country? And what an ETA allows for is for an accounting of people that are coming into the country for security reasons. And then, of course, the visa also allows for that. So there are some similarities, and this is one of the bigger ones, but I did want to point out some of the differences between ETAs and visas. So I'll stop here and allow more time for questioning and give the floor back to Margaret. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Nancy Adozi, for that. I love my panelists that keeping time, really. So thank you for that introductory remarks on what ETA is. I think it gives a little more background, the in-depth explanation on what ETA in the Kenyan context is, or generally, and how it differs from visa. Because there is also the challenge, almost by researchers, including myself, sometimes we tend to conflate free movement with free policies and ETAs, and it's just one aspect of it, because even when we are talking about borderless, the borderless continent, it is just one thing to cross the border, but is another what you do once you cross the border. So easing that into we are still at a very preliminary level, because we are having discussions around entry, but we haven't talked about what then happens when you are inside, because when we talk about closed or open borders, a country could have a very easy process in terms of visa acquisition. But again, it doesn't allow participation when you are inside its territory. So it means that border is still closed. So at the practical level. So thank you so much, Nancy, for those introductory remarks. Of course, we will have follow-up questions on this. I have some here, but let's allow time for the lawyer. At least you ask the lawyer to come in and help us clarify some of these issues. And so Davis Nyaga, who is our third speaker for this afternoon. Davis Nyaga has worked before with the Kenyan government, and I think he has the inside juicy details, and he'll be sharing with us this afternoon. But right now he's a consultant, and he identifies himself as a global mobility and immigration lawyer. So Davis, I will allow you time to make your remarks this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. I hope you can hear me well. I am excited to be on this panel today, and having listened to Professor Linda and Nancy, I feel, yes, there is a lot that needs to be discussed around this issue of ETA. On the 12th of December, 2023, when President William Ruto made the comments that the Kenya needs to remove all restrictions and make the country a welcome destination for all Africans, and not just Africans, but for all nationalities. Actually, as Dr. Lida said, there was an expectation that people just get into a plane and they get into the country without much screening. And actually, just as a reminder, that came just a little, about a month after the president of Rwanda had also stated that any African can get on a plane to Rwanda whenever they wish, and they will not pay a thing while they are entering the country. So President Ruto, having spoken after the president of Rwanda, there was an expectation that that was still the route that Kenya was taking in terms of removing all restrictions to entering Kenya. But I take note of a statement that was made by actually the press secretary for the Kenyan government, Mr. Salim Swale. And he said actually that terrorism is one of the global threats at the moment. And so there was a need to put in mechanisms to ensure that everyone that was coming into the country is not a risk to the country. And you know, Kenya is has been a target by some Al-Shabaab jihadist militants from the neighboring Somalia and also several other countries. And so Kenya has experienced so much attacks from a security perspective. And so unlike Rwanda, and the praise that it remains like that has not experienced any attacks, Kenya has had its own share of these attacks. And so for me, as I think about the ETA, I also see it from that perspective, that as Margaret is putting it right, yes, once you come into the country, there is more. It's not just entering the country. And so the genesis of ETA actually, you know, an ETA is an entry requirement for visa-exempt foreign nationals that are traveling to or transitioning to a country. And generally, it would allow the destination or the transit country to screen travelers before they arrive. So one of the main reasons why ETA is introduced is for purposes of screening travelers before they arrive. And also it increases the visibility and security of all the travelers. And generally, it's semi-automated system. Semi-automated means the approvals will not just come automatically. There is a human hand behind it. Something has to be done by an immigration official to confirm whether the person who is applying to enter the country is authorized to do so. And also an appreciation that ETA offers permission to travel and is authorized by the destination country. And by just possessing an ETA does not give the final authority to enter a country. In simple, admissibility will be determined at the port of entry. So someone can have an ETA, yes, but when you come to the border or maybe at the airport, you are denied entry because when the officials were screening, they found something that will not allow you to be admitted into the country. And actually, you know, the absence of a visa will always create a certain degree of risk. So when a country says that we are opening our borders, they are also accepting that there are certain risks that come with it. And given the need for countries to anticipate potential threats and associated malevolent acts, there is also an aim to make sure that the people that a country is allowing within their borders are also screened and for the protection of the citizens. And therefore, the main aim actually of ETA is generally to accelerate, to facilitate, to strengthen, and also modernize control procedures by offering better protection against document and identity fraud, and also speeding border crossing, streamlining the travel experience, and also shaping the future of travel. Now, the ETA system, the way it is, actually, in my consulting, we've been helping some of our clients process their ETA as they travel into the country. I've realized actually that the system offers numerous advantages in border management, like detecting risk and also preventing irregular migration, and above all, reducing waiting times by identifying people likely to present a risk before they arrive. And actually, the idea of doing all this is not new. As Nancy correctly observed, the ETA system was pioneered by Australia. And that was during the Sydney Olympic Games in the year 2000. That is when Australia actually introduced the Electronic Travel Authority system. They call it ETAS concept. And actually for them, they were testing it to make the travel of those people that were attending the Olympics to be as easy as possible. And after Australia, actually, America also picked from Australia, and they introduced what they call ESTA, Electronic System for Travel Authorization. And also Canadians followed suit. They also introduced Electronic Travel Authorization, and it has been working well for them. And actually, after they realized that this process is working, the modernization is working, actually even Europe is in the process of implementing a similar system. From, I think, mid of 2025, they're introducing the European Travel Information and Authorization System. It is a project that is already ongoing. And for them, they want to make sure that for the visa exempt, those people that are visa exempt to enter into Europe, they also go through a process for screening purposes. And for sure, as Nancy observed, even all the regions that have introduced this kind of system, there is a payment that goes with it. Actually, like the ETAs for Europe will be costing €7 for an application for 3 years. Kenya is $30. US is $21 as at July 2023. So all of them have introduced a system where there is a payment for that. But then, does it have any advantage, especially for the travelers? Does it really help the travelers? And what does it mean from a business perspective? Because I had Professor Linda actually brought that up. Actually, if you were to look at the way the system works and the way the visa on arrival used to work, the e-visas used to work, I am thinking that the ETA is much easier to use. When it was introduced in January, actually, I was interviewed by several media houses, including BBC, and I was one of the people that I was saying, no, this one is just a visa like any other. But I've come to realize that actually it's much easier to use. And also the government of Kenya is also making the system much friendly. There's some requirement that they had introduced early January, but they have yet removed those requirements. And also actually with the amendment of some of the Kenya citizenship and immigration regulations, what the government has also done is also to address the issue of data protection, just to make sure as people are presenting their passports and also their personal information, there is some protection to make sure that that information does not fall into the wrong hands. So in a nutshell, for me, Margaret and my panelists and and other participants, I think it's a good move by the government. For me, all that I'm wishing is that the government can also allow multiple entries by just one ETA, because you see, like what Europe is trying to introduce, theirs will be 3 years. I think the US, I think it's either 4 or 5 years or so. Canada, again, is 2 years. So once you get an ETA, you don't have to be screened every time, because you see for Kenya is a single entry. So if you are screened today and you want to travel tomorrow, you have to submit another application. So you see the essence of screening also brings some questions from the travelers. They're saying, if you screened me yesterday, why do you want to screen me again today? And you are very sure that I was secure for your country just the other day. So I think the government needs also to check on that, so that maybe they can have at least an ETA that can be used not just for one single entry, but it can be used for multiple entries. So that would be my opening remarks. Margaret, willing to take questions from participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David Nyaga. At least we have someone very knowledgeable on the workings of the ETA on the panel. Thank you so much for your remarks. So we will now move to the question and answer session, where you are free to raise your hand if you want to. If you have a question, or you can use the chat function. But you can use the chat function. Yes, before you go on, I want to start with Davis. I see you speak highly of the ETA. Oh, just a moment. Sorry, there is a poll that is coming up. Kindly, before we go into the question and answer, please take a moment to respond to the poll. It will help us to make these webinars and seminars better. So yeah, so you speak highly of the ETA and you think, in your opinion, that this is way better than the visas. I want to speak to cost, because because there is the introduction of the cost, and yet there are certain citizens from certain countries that never used to pay that amount. So we are looking at Africans, and you know the earnings on this continent. We are not the most, the richest. Of course, we are rich in another aspect. But I'm looking at students. I'm looking at those the business people who want to cross into Kenya, get their merchandise and all that. So that cost aspect, because you look at it, someone questioned, actually threw this question to me to say, some of these amounts, you wonder, is it really business? Because it should be an administrative cost. But when you look at it, how many dollars are those? Is that really an administrative cost, or is another income generating activity, which then now we are back to the same problem where we had on the continent, where only the rich or someone who has money can now move cross borders. So we are introducing mechanisms that still now discriminate against those who don't have money. What can you say about the cost, Davis?
Thank you very much, Margaret. Yes, I totally agree with you. I think that $30 would not qualify for an administrative cost. I think it's quite high, and I'm very sure progressively the government might want to look into that because $30 is quite high. But as you mentioned, there are some countries actually that would not require to pay for visa before the ETA. That's countries like South Africa, Mozambique, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Congo, Brazzaville. And actually, I think the government has waived that for those nationalities. Initially, there was a fear for retaliation from these countries, and the government has since commented and actually waived these fees for those nationalities. So I think progressively, maybe this is something that the government might want to consider. And from what I hear from the government, it is likely to happen progressively, because actually, there is also a push to making Africa a tourism destination generally. And so if Kenya want to take that direction to encourage intra-Africa travels, it will also be an opportunity for them, even to waive fees completely, especially for Africans, to encourage intra-Africa travels. That would be a great one. But unfortunately, I'm not a government officer, but I'm just thinking it will be a great one if they were to waive the fees, especially for Africans. And that actually would speak well to the agenda as 2063 for Africa, that we are not just saying that we are opening the borders. Actually, we are doing it for sure. Yes, we might need the screening, but we don't want to make money from Africans' travels within Africa.
So thank you so much, Davis. I want to allow a question from the chat. There is one, and this one I will post to Nancy, if you can. Do Africans with travel documents issued by the Geneva Conventions need an ETA? I think Davis would have been, Davis too, or Nancy. Let's start with Nancy. Need an ETA to enter Kenya?
Yeah, that's a great question that I was actually going to pose to Davis as he's an immigration officer. But I can say that the requirements for the ETA are actually posted on the ETA website for anyone to see. So I can read it again. So it says holders of valid Kenya passports or one-way emergency certificate issued by Kenya Missions Abroad, holders of Kenya permanent residence, valid work permits and passes, holders of valid UN conventional travel documents issued by the government of Kenya, members of the diplomatic missions and international organizations, citizens of East African partner states, and all passengers in transit through Kenya arriving and leaving in the same aircraft. So I'll leave the rest for David to address.
Yeah, David, see if you can address that for us.
I think I was on mute. And Nancy, you're right, they're exempted from ETA.
Okay, yeah, there's even someone who responded. Thank you. So I want to give an opportunity to Omar. You have your hand up.
Thank you very much. I greet in all the panelists and you facilitator. My name is Omar Isaac. I'm from Somalia, as a country which now joined the East African community. So I wanted to know if we visa-free ETA, can we maybe need ETA or not as a newly joined East African community?
Omar?
Yeah, can you hear me?
If I heard you right, you say now you are from Somalia.
Yeah.
Yes, we recently joined the East African community.
Yeah. So, are we need ETA or not? I want to know that.
If I had from, okay, yes. Thank you for that question. Let me give Mnyarazi, it's a quick Mnyarazi.
Yes, thank you so much, Moderator Margaret. So my name is Monyani. I'm from Zimbabwe. So I've had a first-hand experience of using the ETA when I was coming to Nairobi in January. I think a week after it was implemented. Safe to say that was a very, very chaotic process. With half of the people on my flight who didn't know that needed to happen, right? And Dr. Nancy raised some argument about how that is happening on a global scale. And my question, not on a global scale, really on the Americans. And my question is like, seeing that Africa is, first of all, it's an emerging market with a very youthful youth dividend. How does this translate to the benefit of Africans who have this extra layer that's put into travel? Number one, you spoke of the security risks that are being mitigated by this ETA, which is, for me, like the screening that was happening way before in Kenya, where when you arrive in Kenya, they take your fingerprints at the airport and they take your pictures every time without fail. And I've been to Kenya a number of times. So the screening and security concerns were already an issue that Kenya was taking very seriously, right? And getting to the Kenyan airport, it's one of the most bizarre countries where you get to check out before, get out of the car and then be screened before you get to the airport. There are so many points of checking, So when you travel in Africa, you don't experience all that, And then with all those, then to come back and use the security as a pass to say, okay, it doesn't make sense, And number three, the cost implications, $30 plus $4, I think, which says called bank charges. First of all, why am I paying bank charges for a service? And I'm struggling with your differentiation of the visa and ETA, and I think it's just an issue of semantics of Dr. Nancy, like trying to sugarcoat something which is visas, they're screening you. The only difference maybe with a visa and ETA is that a visa will ask for my banking details, That's if I'm sponsoring my own trip. But if it's an organization that's sponsoring my trip, I don't have to submit that. But in an ETA, if I'm coming for business, I'm also have to submit a letter of invitation from the organization that's inviting me into Nairobi. So when it comes to the intricacies, when I'm applying for a visa in the UK and when I'm applying for the ETA, the difference will be maybe number one, the cost, but the documents and the verifications are almost the same, So it feels to me like you guys came here for a PR exercise and it's insincere, honestly. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mnyarazi. Those are a number of questions. One was directed at Nancy, but I know, let's start with Nancy, but there is also an aspect I wanted to respond to, where you say when you get to Kenya, the airport, they start screening you even before you get to where the proper screening is done. But that is just all over Kenya. And if you had understood the Kenyan security situation, Kenya has been a target of terrorism, especially in the early 2010s, 11s, 12, there was so much. Between 2010 and 2015, Kenya experienced about 100 terror attacks. So that is where that exercise of screening everywhere you go, to the supermarkets, to the what, came up. So yeah, that bit you need to understand that there is a history to it. But then I really want to give Nancy an opportunity. And then there is the question on Somali. Davis can handle that. And then also Linda can step in and say something. Nancy, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think I understood the question correctly. There were a lot of commentary that were attached to the question, but I think the main question is, how is it benefiting me as an African? I think that's the biggest question. And what I can say to this is, first of all, I'm speaking from the point of view of the AUC, which is the Secretariat of Member States. And what I can say is, as my colleagues have mentioned, is this is not the final point. this is a progression towards something else, right? So for example, when the first time that it was announced, the visa-free policy, it wasn't clear whether or not the East African community partners would also be applying for the ETA. But later on, we saw that Kenya came out and said, oh, by the way, EAC partners do not have to get the ETA. And then later on, we heard that, you know, by the way, bilaterally, Ethiopians also do not have to pay for the ETA. So we see that Kenya is progressing towards a certain point, as Davis mentioned, and the hope is that that progression will ultimately lead to a point where we can honestly and clearly say, oh, by the way, Kenya is visa-free for all Africans. So what I want to say is that we see a progression. Now, the important part of a progression is that you are not going to see the end just yet. You're going to see only the stage in which you're in. So I encourage everyone here to understand that Kenya is progressing towards a certain point. And what we are witnessing is that we're just in the middle of these stages, and we're going to see more and more progression as we grow and as we see Kenya growing as well. So hopefully there will be a future where you don't have to pay for an ETA, but we are not sure about that. We just have to continuously see what Kenya is doing and wait for the Kenyan government to give us more information about this policy as well.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Davis?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Sorry, Margaret. Is that now the citizens of Somali are required to apply for ETA? Actually, if you were to look at the list that provides for the countries that are exempt, Kenya has been specific. It is citizens of the East African partner states, and then it goes ahead to list them. There must be a reason why they listed, because they would have said just partner states, but they state Burundi, DRC, Rwanda, South Sudan, Tanzania, Uganda. So that's the only countries that are exempt.
Okay, thank you, Davis. Prof?
Yeah, I think, can you hear me now?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
I think there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of misunderstanding or confusion about this process. And I feel like the sensitization should have started early enough so that these questions don't come now. So when they announced ETA, the aspect of EAC should have come out. The aspect of agreements with countries like South Africa, like existing agreements between countries that were already visa-free, should have come out altogether. But it's almost like it's coming out very piecemeal. So I feel like if ETA was comprehensively explained and outlined and clearly states who is able to get an ETA without paying for the fee, it would have been easier. But because everything is sort of like coming in piecemeal, it makes it difficult for people to understand. But I also agree with Nancy in the sense that it's a progressive process. And I feel like maybe the government is trying to institute a system where they can people can understand there's a security system that has to be in place when people need to move in freely. We need to screen you, we need to determine whether you are the right person to come into the country. And then from there, they can start removing other aspects of it. And that could be including the fee. We may end up going to, you know, like Europe to say it will be €7 or $7, who knows? But I think that question of regional, the multiple ETAs is actually important, especially because I think it was in 2022, Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya introduced an East Africa tourism visa. So what does that mean for ETA as well? Because now it's a different system. Would now Uganda and Rwanda have to introduce an ETA? So it's having questions about what happens to the regional dynamics of mobility, what happens to the continental dynamics of mobility. And these are questions we need to have much more detail, much more research, much more engagement with, not only with policymakers, but the actual migrants who are moving, those within Africa and those outside of Africa, so we can actually learn to improve the system based on evidence. And I'm not saying that because I'm a researcher and I'm trying to amplify that aspect, but research is important for us to sort of improve systems, and at least the honest aspect of what works and what doesn't work will actually lead to improvements in the system. So over to you, Margaret.
Thank you, Prof. There is still we still have more time. If you have questions, please raise your hands or post them in the chat. Okay, so there is a comment here from Otilia, who is the head of special projects here at the Institute for Security Studies. She says, the reality is that the rollout was fumbled, and I agree. The chaos Mnyarazi described is precisely because they are from a country that previously didn't have to pay, yes, they didn't have to pay anything for a visa or pre-check, same as that Omar raises as a citizen of an East African country that is not yet, in quote unquote, exempt. The communication should be now clearer on the system, the process, and the implications. And that's what actually Nancy has captured very well as well, continues to. Very well said, Otilia. And I've always maintained that there is a hand up. Let me give a chance to, can I know whose hand up is up?
It's me again, Linda.
Oh, it's you. I was wondering. Yeah.
I just had a thought because I realized
Yes.
also the introduction of the ETA introduced people who are offering services to process ETA that may not be valid sources. And an example being, I had a guest coming from UK, and one of them unfortunately used a different link and was charged double or triple the cost, but never got the visa. And they were asking for more documents than required. So I feel like it has led to the emergence of other people offering a service that may not be experts in that service, and they're charging on top of the $30 a fee for that service. So I feel like this has led to another new issue that I don't know if the government was aware, but it's something that we need to factor in, that there should be that clarity that just use the portal and it's easy for you to use. You don't have to go through an agent, or if they're going through an agent, they can only advise you to do it yourself and provide you with the link, a travel agent to provide you the link. So I think that's a key aspect we need to pay attention to. Over to you, Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you for so much for that clarification, Bulelani. The floor is yours.
Good day, guys. Okay, my question was answered. I'm a South African, so my question was answered through the link that was provided in the chat. However, what I wanted to ask is probably just thoughts from Nancy, because the impression that was given by President Ruto as well as the Rwandans was that of a completely free movement of persons, right? Though I don't understand the free movement of people in the West African countries, Nancy, could you please maybe just briefly describe how that works, the free movement of people in the West African countries? How does that work? And then perhaps then when you talk about the progression, do you think that as Africa in general, because that was the impression from President Ruto and the Rwandans, do you think we're going to get to that space where there's a completely free movement of people as it is in the West African countries?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Sorry, Margaret, I completely jumped in without giving you the floor.
No worries.
Thank you so much for that question. So in the West African region, one of the things that we have in the ECOWAS region is that we have several years. So the Free Movement of Persons Protocol of ECOWAS was in 1979. So that was much like years before I was born. And I can honestly tell you, because my father should have been maybe like a teenager in his early 20s at that time, it wasn't right away you could move freely. You had to get the documentation. You still had to it was very difficult to move freely within the region. It wasn't easy, but it was difficult still in 1979, 1980. What we've seen though is that over the years, we've seen a progression. So like now ECOWAS is actually introducing has introduced like an ID card, where if you're able to get the ID card, you don't even need your passport anymore. You could just travel with your ID card. But that was not possible back in 1979. I can assure you that was not possible back in 1979. But we see that now, like late 2010s, 2020s, we've seen that they've introduced that. We also see that ECOWAS has introduced recently the ECOWAS visa for people who are traveling into the ECOWAS region. Again, this is something that was introduced, I think, as early as 2022, 2023. This was not introduced back in 1979. So all of this to say that what we've seen in the ECOWAS region is that there has been a protocol since 1979, but it hasn't always been free movement since 1979. So what I want everyone to understand, and I keep saying this, is that not everything is going to be there right away. Not everything, and we don't expect everything to be there right away, because even if you look at other regions in the world, when they have the free movement zones, it's not right away. It's through a progression of timelines, right? So I want to make sure that everyone understands that even in the ECOWAS region, we didn't see free movement right away. We see it over the years being implemented. Now, that can honestly mean that we could probably see this happening with the Kenyan visa-free policy. Again, I do not speak for the government, but the hope is that eventually we'll get there. We also see that in Rwanda. Rwanda also came out recently, I think at December 2023 or January 2024, where they said, okay, we're officially free. And when I remember personally, when I heard the news, I was like, wait a minute, you've had free movement for a while now. But I understand that now it's even more so, right? So we can see that, for example, the person who was asking about Somalians getting, being able to go without having an ETA. Somalia is a new country within the EAC. However, when you go on the list on the website, it's not there yet. It doesn't mean that it will never be there. It just means that it will be coming, right? So it's the same thing that we've seen in the ECOWAS region. Like, we've seen a progression through time of greater and more facilitation policies that enable people to move freely. I hope I answered your question, but if I didn't, please feel free to come with a follow-up.
Thank you so much. I think I'm answered.
Okay, Bulalani, thank you for your very good question. So Imani in the chat says, hi, thanks for this webinar. The last point raised by Prof. Oucho is very important. And the same risk and false claims or websites are observed also in countries like Canada. Emphasis, there is a need for clearer communication from the authorities, and security needed to quell such forms of exploitation. Same thing Otilia was saying, there was never proper communication. In fact, I'm reading here where Davis is responding to Bulelani to say, as South Africans, while they say the extended, there is something here, just for clarity, South Africans will still need to you fill the ETA, but you just don't pay. Look at those small nitty-gritty details, which now Prof. Oucho was saying, the sensitization bit is lacking completely from the word go. And I've always maintained this. When I read about migration governance actually mirrors our societal governance. It just reflects how we govern ourselves as a society. And you see, I'm even tempted to ask, was this ETA, the introduction of ETA, a presidential command, or was it well thought? Was it a government? Did they sit down to think about it? Was there any research around it? So you see that there's challenges and misunderstandings surrounding this ETA, the visas, the free movement are not isolated issues. That's what I'm saying. They are indicative of the larger systemic governance problems that we are having on the continent. So we take one step, we deal with the challenges. Sometimes we don't deal with them conclusively, then we keep suffering from them. I think if there was proper procedures put in place, we would minimize. Of course, we will not eliminate all the problems, because migration is very dynamic. And in fact, one of the questions I was going to ask is that how adaptable is ETA to the changing dynamics of migration on the continent? You want to ask yourself that question, and perhaps Linda may help us that at a later stage, but let me allow Abubakar to ask a question.
Hello,
Abu Bakr.
everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Abu Bakr, as mentioned by our lovely lady here. I'm not going to waste time about the history of Somalia as well as it is joining into the East Africa community recently, which we really appreciate as Somalis. We now feel that we are part of a bigger family. So Kenya and Somalia have always been neighbors, and the two nations have always been interconnected as far as economy and security is concerned. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to learn a bit from you because you are a subject matter in this particular issue. I was wondering if you have some projections, kind of something you have envisaged for the near future as far as the trade volume between the two countries is concerned, as far as the economy and the trade volume between the two countries, Somalia and Kenya, not just Somalia and Kenya, but there will be many African countries that will flock to Kenya based on this visa-free policy. Therefore, what are you predicting in the near future? And I also know that it will be baby steps. It will not be tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So if you are comfortable with that, please, you have the floor. Thank
Yes,
you so
Abu
much.
Bakr.
It's
Yes,
Margaret.
thank you, Abu Bakr. Yeah, thank you, Abu Bakr. Maybe that one I will allow Davis to come in and give his thoughts, and then the rest of the panelists can also do that. But before that, let me see what Teniola says, Tayo. I think the communication challenges are because it appears they're making it up as they go. I'm not even sure, as she says. No, sorry, I'm not sure if it's like, yeah, it's a she. There was an ETA plan when Ruto initially went around announcing visa-free travel and being celebrated for it. Yes, I have the same reservations, and Otili actually agrees. That is how they ended up regressing. Yeah. So you see these communications. In fact, it was supposed to be launched, was it last year? Then they launched it after a week. There was some retraction, all that. That's why we say our governance is not streamlined. We don't put thoughts in. Unfortunately, I'm an African here and a very learned African, and this is some of the, the problems we still have. So the announcement was made premature. I agree. I was even tempted to ask a question. Why did they pilot? Some kind of piloting instead of just saying, okay, because I don't know about the systems. Are they working? Davis, maybe you'll speak to this. You say you help people to acquire the ATA. Are the systems okay? And I'm also thinking about internet connectivity on the continent, because then you have to go to the system. Now, these are the things we have to think about. Maybe I will allow the panelists to come, Davis, and then Linda, and then Nancy, in that order.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Margaret. I'll start with your question, maybe just to give it an attempt. I agree with you that I think there was a bit of rush in the introduction of ETA because of a presidential directive, I believe so. Because even to some of us who are in Kenya and immigration practitioners, some of these things were also not making sense. And there was very little public participation actually into the process, I would say so, because the consultation that we always see when the government wants to introduce a policy did not happen with ETA. I think it's in an effort of implementing the Pan-Africanism that we are seeing with our presidency currently. And also that directive was so firm, and I think the timelines were also very strict. And so actually, if you go to the website, actually to the link, you will realize there is a lot of copy and pasting from the electronic system for travel authorization, the one that was introduced by the USA. A lot of it actually just copy and paste. Where there is USA, they just put Kenya. A lot of copy and pasting. So you can tell there was a bit of rush into it, and that is why actually there is a lot of pulling back and realizing we made a mistake here. Some countries actually there was a visa abolition agreements. Countries like Ethiopia, that's why they are realizing if we introduce these to Ethiopians, there will be a problem because there is a visa abolition agreement that is very old, older than all of us here, as I would say. That's why you hear citizens from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, some of them complaining because for them, they will just pick a passport and travel into Kenya. So I think there was little attention on some of those details. But as you said, rightly so, maybe time will heal some of those challenges that we have with the ETA. And I would agree with you, yes, connectivity is a problem. Even the system itself is a problem. Sometimes, actually, the reason why some of the travelers come to agents like us asking for help is because they think we have a way of circumventing the process and getting them approvals, because when they submit, the system is just going around and not giving them the leeway to submit the application. So it is not just for those people that are traveling and out of the country, but even the system managed by the department itself as a problem. Sometimes it is down, sometimes it's up, sometimes you have to submit those applications late in the night. So I think the government may have also to keep considering some of that challenges. Yeah. I would also want to answer Abubakar. Definitely when there is an opening of borders, trade is evidently will grow. And so by virtue of Somali being a member of East African community, there will be trade volumes increase into between Kenya and Somali. I may not give the figures because I have not done any research on it, but it goes without saying that yes, there will be increase on trade because, you know, some of the barriers that are there because of the trade barriers that are there will be lifted by virtue of being a member of the EAC. So I agree with you, Abubakar. Definitely there will be growth from a trade perspective, but only time will tell.
Thank you, Davis. Prof?
Yes, I think I couldn't agree more with Davis in terms of consultation. It was lacking. It was a surprise to some of us because we were hearing visa free until 12th December, and they said, oh, we have a new system called ETA, and we're all wondering, what is this ETA? How does it work? Who is it going to affect? So I feel like the consultation is necessary throughout the process, and when they're looking into it, they have to have conversations with all migrants. So the first migrant group I'm thinking about, cross-border migrants or traders, if you think about it. If, for example, a Ugandan who's a cross-border trader, yes, he or she may not need an ETA to pay for an ETA, but how do they apply for one if they don't have a smartphone or they don't have access to computer services? So how relatable is the system? I think you talked about adaptability. How does it adapt to people who may not have access to the platform? And will they have that aspect where you can actually get to the port and just do an ETA through the immigration officer? So it's those aspects that they need to look into in more detail. But I also think there's an aspect where that Davis mentioned that it's the eCitizen portal that is being used. eCitizen at the moment is being used for all payments, including those going to the park, anything, going to the museum. So has the government factored a situation where the system will become so overwhelmed that it crashes? I don't know if it has happened, but have they considered that? And when that happens, what's the alternative, especially if maybe there's a large meeting in Kenya and all these participants need to come and they can't come because they can't access ETA? So what is the next option? So I think these are aspects that they needed to have a consultation with different key people, including tech people, ITC people who can actually improve on the system, but also that aspect of hacking and also just someone trying to break into the system. I don't know if that has been interrogated, but this is me thinking more broadly about if you have one system that receives application, what happens when it stops working? You then actually make people not being able to access, it's not accessible to the country. So maybe I'll leave it there and hand back to you, Margaret.
Yes, thank you. Nancy, you have a comment on the questions?
Yeah. I just wanted to quickly talk about, because someone had mentioned that, it was Linda actually, Prof. Linda, who had mentioned about the fraudulent cases of people offering ETAs and how I think someone else mentioned that we see that in Canada. So I can actually speak to a little bit about that. In Canada, yes, that does happen, where people are offering ETAs through their agency, and then it's not like an ETA that the government is offering, so they charge more than the $7 that's required. And the way that Canada has been dealing with it is probably the same way that Kenya is also trying to deal with it, which is saying like, unless it comes from our ETA website, it is not, you know, like it's not a travel document. So that's why the website was made. That's why, you know, like everything on the website was created. And also that's why we see the list of countries that are exempt and all those things. But I also want to address something that also popped up in the chat, which is the security concern. So I want to talk about the other zones around the world that we see using an ETA system. And I understand the issue with the ETA, like, okay, Kenya already has security systems and things like that. I want us to look at, when we're looking at Canada and the US, Canada and the US share the same security system, like literally they share data. So whatever happens in the US, you can get that information in Canada, but they still have an ETA system set up. Why is that? If I, as a country, have access to your security system to check anybody that comes through my borders, why am I still requiring you and your citizens to do an ETA before they come to my country if I can just go in, put their name in, and find the information that I need? And the answer to that is you still need a backup system sometimes to be able to not only house the data, but also to be able to, you know, say, okay, these are the people that are coming in and we recognize these people. So it's sometimes it can be a backup system as well for countries who already have security measures. So I want everyone to understand that. The final point that I will make on this is this: Africa is young. I know that we see ourselves as like, you know, we've been here for a long time, and we have since the beginning of Earth, we've been here. But as post-colonial countries, Africa is a young continent, right? So that means that we are implementing things and we're learning as we go. And I also want to say that a lot of people say, you know, Africa always had free movement. We didn't need passports back then. We didn't need documentation. We didn't need visas. And I've done my research and I can tell you right now, yes, we did used to use passports. It wasn't a document. What it was a little tiny figurine where you had the characteristic of the face of the person. And when a person was moving from place to place, because we had pastoralists, we had people raising animals, all those things, they would carry around this tiny little figurine. You can still see it sometimes in Benin, for example. I know where I can buy those things, where you would show it and that would identify you as to which tribe you belong to as you moved within Africa. So Africa has always had free movement, but I also want us to understand that we've also had a need to identify each other, not for the sake of anything other than to say, ah, you're from here. Welcome, my brother. Welcome, my sister.
Okay. Thank you for those great observations there, my esteemed panelists. Then we have a comment from Cham. Of course, Iman agrees with the data security is another serious challenge, given that we don't have that the system on the continent, at least for what you're saying there. If you look at the Shenzhen region where they have this very well established. Cham says Benin and Rwanda have both demonstrated the benefits of free movement in Africa. So there is this apathy. Some others are raising security issues or job insecurity. These countries have shown that Africans are not a threat. That's Kenya is the second most populated country in East Africa and most dynamic economy. Opening its borders will unleash massive opportunities for tourism industry which plays a key role in economy of the country. And yeah, so this you see. When countries open that, of course, then now many people will start traveling because many, quote unquote, there is the hope that it will open business door. Yes, and you make this comment, AFCFTA will only deliver when we are allowed to move, established, and stay in any of the 55 African countries. Yeah. So I shared here a report that ISS commissioned last year. It is about migration governance in Kenya, in Ethiopia. It was kind of a comparative case study. And one of the findings we had, when we were in the field collecting data, there was this question about where do people get knowledge? about the bilateral agreements that the Kenyan government has with other countries, even regarding labor, regarding any issues on migration governance. And if you are a Kenyan and you are honest, I'm not sure about other African countries, people are likely to go on TikTok. Oh, this Facebook lady who went to Qatar, she's having my life in Qatar and watching all those matters. They don't go to the website, the Kenyan website. So there's some websites on the ministries that have very good knowledge and facts, but people don't. So there's that. So I don't know what is happening. They don't believe in the government. So when Linda was talking about sensitization, I was asking myself, who should do this? Because it looks like when it comes to migration, people don't believe in the government. They know where they get the information. They don't want the formal procedures. They want the way. That's why Davis said some people approach them hoping that they can go around the system and allow them. So there is that. Who should do the sensitization? Maybe that is the question. But I'm also welcoming you, our those in attendance, to look at the report. Very interesting one. Cham says free movement in Africa is seen as an elitist project, whereas the first beneficiaries are border communities. Exactly. And ICB traders. And that's the question I asked about the cost. Because when you put a cost to it, you make it elitist, and I agree. They are not involved in the process, and their voices are not heard in the right fora. CSOs, researchers, policymakers, and development partners should seek a convening point to deliver on the AU FMP. I agree. But Bulelani says, Nancy, what you finished off with, that is the pre-colonial movement and identification, is incredibly interesting. Could you please share any research on that? You could share the links. Yes. So these are very interesting comments on the ICAB traders, especially even in East Africa. You know, people move close to Uganda to get merchandise to come back to Kenya and sell. Merchandise comes from Middle East, from many parts of the world. So, and you find that the majority who are crossing borders are not involved. In fact, like we've already made that observation that this is something someone just left and woke up and say, we are going to have. In fact, they say free visa. It was, we later learned that it is ETA, but it was announced as free visa. Then no, ETA. Now people are still trying to understand what is free movement. Now there is ETA, now there is visa. Even the jargon itself is very confusing for those routes on a day-to-day. So I'm not sure. Yes, there is a hand up from Iman.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the informative session and the very rich discussions, actually. And as an African migrant, we all celebrated their policy, I can tell you. So it's important to clarify, actually, the essence of the policy, and that it's a process that is still going on. From the look of it, the policy seems to have an outward facing side, which could easily address nationals of, let's say, European, Western countries who are used to these systems, where there are tried and true examples to learn from. Yet the inward facing, I think, side of it, which addresses African nationals, and if I may say that, would constitute perhaps the bulk of the travelers to Kenya in future and in the past. This is where more research needs to be done, for all the reasons mentioned by your esteemed panelists, because we don't have sufficient connectivity because of the previously instituted no visa policies with some countries, and now it's seen as a regression. And then there is the issue of data security, which has been emphasized time and again, and that can bring lawsuits, I may say. We are seeing, this is the era of hackers, so I think it needs to be taken very considerably with great attention. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Iman, for your observations. Okay, that's just Nancy sharing some readings on that. So we are about to wind up, and I want to appreciate all of you. Unless there's one more question, because we are coming to the end of the session. No hand is up, so we are good. So I want to give my panelists a minute or two to wrap up. Yeah, to wrap up. We start with Linda, Nancy, and lastly, Davis.
Okay, thank you so much, Margaret, for this engaging discussion. I think I got more than I expected. I think it was a very honest conversation of what happened and what should happen going forward. And I think I'll pick on a last point that you mentioned, the importance of the voices of migrants in this process, because I think they're the ones who are going to go through it. So how involved are they? How does the government engage them in the process? And it shouldn't be an afterthought. So I think going forward in this ETA, when they're looking at expanding or looking at other people moving, they need to consult the different types of migrants on the move, including those who cross borders, whether they can adjust the ETA to accommodate their interests, because they're different category of people. But we need to do more engagement, more research, more consultation. I can't say that enough. More sensitization on this conversation. So I hope that going forward, the government will be able to have more engagements with different people, different stakeholders, including the migrants. So I'll pass over to you, and thank you so much for including me in this discussion.
Thank you so much, Linda. Over to you, Nancy.
Thank you, Margaret. Yes, I think that I learned a lot, and I appreciate all of the questions. I was taking notes about some of the questions that people had as well. But I want to end on this note, and the note is a story about how I found myself in Kenya without a visa prior to Ruto's announcement. So I actually went to Kenya in November, I think it was either October or November of last year, before Ruto's announcement. And as I boarded the plane from Addis Ababa, I showed them my visa. I had an East African visa at the time. So I had previously used it. So I didn't read my fine print. So it said that if you get this visa and you go outside of the region, then you cannot use this visa anymore. I didn't know about that. So I had the visa. I thought, it was multiple entry. I thought, it didn't matter where I went after I entered through Kenya. It didn't matter where I went between my first visit to Kenya, my second visit to Kenya. So I was able to get on the plane. Then I landed in Nairobi, and then at the immigration kiosk, I was asked, "Where's your visa?" And I said, "This is my visa." I showed them my East African visa, and I said, "This is it." And he said, "Yeah, but I had gone to Benin. You went to Benin, so your visa is no longer valid." I'm panicking at this point, because you have to understand, I'm used to like America and Canada, and like I would have been detained had it been America or Canada. I would have been detained. I would have been sent back. I would have been a disgrace to my parents, all of it. But Kenya, basically, the immigration officer said, "Don't worry, it's not a big deal. Just go to the immigration office, make sure that you do your application there, get a visa, then come back to me." So I'm thinking at this point, like, surely he's joking. Surely I'm about to be deported back to Ethiopia. And it wasn't like the case. It was very much, I had to go back to the immigration officer and tell him my issue, like my visa had expired without me knowing, that I couldn't travel outside of the East African region between that visa. But all of that to say, Kenya is a very open country, because they could have deported me back for disrespecting their laws, for not coming into the country without like the right visa. But they basically said, "No, just pay for your visa." And I got it within, I think it was 15 minutes that I got the visa. And then I went back to the immigration officer. He said, "Okay, you're free to go." So all of that to say, as long as we're talking about an open society, as long as we're talking about a more integrated Africa, as long as we're talking about Africans moving, I still believe in Kenya. I still believe in what they're doing. And I still believe that this is the beginning of something that is going to be greater. And I see someone mentioning in the chat that it's maybe because of my status. Let me tell you something. I always travel with my Togolese passport. I don't have any other passport but I'm very proud to be Togolese. So my Togolese passport is what I travel with. I did not have a UN passport, did not have an AU passport. I went in there humbly as a Togolese person. So they could have sent me back to Togo even if they wanted to. So yeah, it was definitely not because of my status. It may have been because of my smile, because I smiled a lot. I was scared. But yeah, just to say that. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. 1 minute, Davis.
I think for me, I would agree with Nancy. I would say Kenya is on the right track. For me, I'm really looking forward to Kenya actually going now to the extent of ratifying the FMP, because, you know, if Kenya is championing the opening of borders, then I don't know why we are still shy in taking up on the FMP and just taking it up and having it as part of our laws. Maybe that would speak louder, especially from the executive. But I would say, yes, a lot needs to be done with the ETA. I'm very sure the government has the right intentions with it. And maybe after the country is off this economic situation that it is at the moment, maybe they're likely to scrap the $30. Only time will tell. Thank you, Margaret.
So thank you so much, my esteemed panelists. Thank you for making time and, of course, giving us those insightful comments, remarks on this very timely topic. It's been a hot one. Thank you. I want to appreciate the panelists. I want to appreciate our co-conveners of this session, the African Migration and Development Center. I also want to appreciate the government of Netherlands for supporting this session. And also, I want to appreciate all of you who took time from your schedules to attend this informative discussion. So we hope this is just the beginning, because like we say, we need to keep learning at every stage. And there is a question I've always said, perhaps these bilateral agreements, with all its hiccups and challenges, it's a way Africa is writing its story as far as free movement is concerned. I always say maybe, and I hope the AU is in the room, they will maybe not like this one, maybe the time for the continental level is not here. We will start with these baby steps. At some point, we will get there. But African states are telling a different story when it comes to free movement. So thank you so much. And so we've come to the end of our session.